Welcome to, this is our fifth session on project-based learning. We're going to be looking at management. And just know that, we've spent the last several weeks looking at different concepts in our live sessions. And at the same time, you're working and developing your PBL unit, and the pacing of developing that PBL unit may be taking longer than what I am, quote, pacing out the sessions. And there's nothing to worry about in that regard. Take the time you need. Our goal is you have school starting very, very soon. And it'd be great if most of you have your PBL unit fleshed out by the end of this month. You do have through October for support from me, either through probably through WhatsApp, because that's probably ideal way, although you can also use email. And you could use the WhatsApp group, which I encourage you to do because you may not be the only one who has a question. However, if you prefer to just ask me as a personal question, that's fine too. I want to support you and help you be successful. And so there is available opportunities for what we call virtual office hours, where I can look at what you're doing. I will be looking at the projects I'll be skimming through, but then I'll be reading them through thoroughly as they are completed so that I can give you feedback about any next steps. Because once you have the template completed, you have your units, your assessments, and it's just important to then to map those out as well. Okay, so with that in mind, let's start with this question. If you could have one superpower for just one day, what would it be and why? Think about that, and I'd like you to post in the chat box your answer. Ooh, you want to hear what your students are thinking? Well, that's an interesting power to have. At the same time, sometimes we don't want to know what people are thinking. That could be really surprising and shocking at the same time. But that's great. That is a superpower. Fly to get everywhere quickly, and especially when I think about the traffic in Alexandria, just on the main roads along the coast. I can completely understand why in certain points of the day, flying would be so much better. Good ideas. Change others' minds. Ooh, that could be an interesting topic for ethical conversation, because there's a good side to that, and then there's a concerning side to that. So finding that balance. But then again, that's why you're the superhero with that ability, because you would have that ethical balance. It could be an interesting conversation. So I asked that question, having one superpower, because when we think about project-based learning, and once you have your academics planned out, it's very important to then also think about the logistics. And it's logistics about what we do as teachers in planning and preparation, as well as what we want our students to do in planning and preparation along the way. Like once the plan's in place, how do they learn how to take leadership of that plan and implement and move forward, to be developing their agency skills? So these are our norms. Everyone contributing deepens everyone's learning, and we'll use the chat for that. Pay attention to self and others, especially as we might have some latency issues online. I've noticed that at times with Zoom. So we'll manage this as best we can. Listen intently with one's whole self and ask questions. Please ask questions, because I know you have them, and I know that there are things that you're working on as you move forward, and we want to make sure that you feel successful with the PBL unit you're designing. So far, without exaggeration, I can say every PBL idea that all of you have come up with are very strong ideas, and they just range in terms of where they are in terms of development, but they all could be really exciting and engaging for students, as we build that. But it's going to be dependent upon your questions as you move forward. How do we engage students in real-world exploration through PBL? This is our ongoing driving question, our call to action that we're trying to answer in your own individual ways for making learning more purposeful and valuable in the students' eyes, so that they are more willing to do even more work and effort into what they're working on. So, and then again, just my background. And if you go to the link, either links, you will find publications articles I've written that are available for anyone to read through about project-based learning, differentiation, and other related topics, as well as the bottom link, the opening paths link that takes you to even more resources that you can use to deepen and expand your practice with project-based learning, among other topics. So let's start with a review of some of the key things we've looked at in our last session, because we talked about assessment, and that can be really challenging. So the first thing we just want to emphasize is that any type of assessments that you currently use that you find are strong, you're going to continue to use those. And they're really important because you want to, have assessments where you're monitoring their growth every week. You want to see where they're at. And so using these type of assessments are great ways of doing that, as well as there'll be certain assessments we might call benchmark assessments, where you expect them to have attained a level of progress, growth, or mastery, if you will. And so you're going to do those assessments. And so when you're planning project-based learning, there always the question comes up about what assessments can I use, as if there's this notion that you can't use, good quality traditional tools. Well, you absolutely can, and they're just a part of the work. We just need to make sure that we are adapting it for project-based learning. And so one of the first things is to keep in mind that in PBL units, we usually have students working in groups to practice those professional skills that colleges and employers are looking for. And we can do that. We just need to separate, what we do individually from the group as far as grading. So any grade that's going into the grade book must be individual. So we keep it clean. We don't want to do group grades because, as we know, some students may not be doing as much as other students or have the same level of understanding, and we can't find that out unless we do individual assessments. And we talk about another way to look at it is separate the academics from the logistics, so that students know the logistics. These are the expectations for how you shape a professional looking, high quality appearing product. Whereas the meat or the substance, if you're a vegetarian, let's use the word substance, is going to be this list on the left, which is skills, concepts, content understanding, and fact base. I mean, those are the things that we want to focus on. And another way to help us, and this is not something new that I'm sharing. I know that all of you are aware of this. I'm just bringing it to the forefront of our practice. So you can use your current knowledge and expertise to look at your existing assessments and assignments and say, how can I make it more assessment fog free? So it's about, good academic criteria has qualitative expectations as opposed to quantitative expectations, and are based upon formative feedback checkpoints. So not every assessment needs to go into the gradebook. It shouldn't. It should just, what it should do is inform us so we can best support them. And we gave this example about presentations. It's just one way of looking at. So in the A box, these are concepts that are about, assessing academic understanding, whereas the B box is more the logistics. So if we can separate those out, as I said, like when I teach a grad class, I give my students two pages. One page has the academic requirements, and the second page has the logistic requirements. And so they know logistics have to be completed before I'm going to assess it. They expect them to take a look and do a better job. Now, when I taught in high school, I would do the same thing, but sometimes I'd have to have students meet with me and do the work in front of me to ensure that they got it done in case they were resistant. But so that's the difference between, say, grad school and university and uh, the K-12 in our schools. And then we just talk about examples. When you look at your rubrics, take a close look at your rubric and think about, do I have qualitative information that includes clarifying content. So what's in the red is the clarifying content that really distinguishes between the different levels, and it's very concrete and observable. We can see if it's there or it's not there. Quantitative stuff is very subjective and difficult to identify, such as 2 images or 4 images. Those are logistical requirements. We need to separate those out. And you have available to you this rubric on rubrics that can help you look at your own existing rubrics, because one of the things you need to create with your PBL unit is a rubric that you can use. Now, you can use an existing rubric. If you've got one that you feel is already the one you want to use, that's fine. But review the language of that rubric, and does it fulfill mastered criteria in this rubric? Because if it doesn't, it needs to be revised. You don't have to throw it away, just revise it, make it better. And just know that when you are working on your rubrics, that's an area that you can share with me. Say, hey, I've got this rubric. Here are the changes I've made, or here is my thoughts, because I want to hear your thoughts. Don't just send me a rubric and say, John, can you can you fix this for me? I want you to fix it, or tell me where you think the fixes need to be, because I want to hear your thinking, and then I will support you. So that's something you can definitely do. So just based upon a review, this asks, where could you look for assessment fog in your lessons and assessments? You can answer the question that way, or tell me, what have you found as far as areas that you want to, you've seen assessment fog since we've done the last webinar. What have you found, or where could you look? Take 10 seconds to reflect, and then post in the chat box, please. Okay, we're going to go ahead and continue. So when we talk about managing projects, oh, good. Thank you for being the first to share. Rubrics, yeah, and assessment criteria. Those are really important to look at. And there's no. It's so important to be transparent in our practice, because if we can look and find where the assessment fog is, because it's there, I will guarantee you it's there. There's every school I've ever visited where they've shared with me the rubrics, especially like, for example, when I'm doing school reviews and I look at the rubrics, there are some good rubrics out there, but there's always some assessment fog in them. That we can look at, and not just rubrics. There's other types of assessments too. Even quizzes can have assessment fog in them. Yeah, I think that's a really good way of saying it, Dina, when the evaluation does not reflect the student's real learning depth. That's a really good point. So when we talk about managing project-based learning, a unit, you look at this list, and hopefully a lot of this is not anything new in terms of what we normally do in preparing a traditional unit. Some of the language looks a little bit different, such as entry event, which might be your anticipatory set, although entry events can be much more strongly tied to the entire unit, where anticipatory set is usually based on what's going on in that first lesson. The driving question, the big idea, the calendar, having your standards, your rubrics, your checklists. All of these things are important parts of a PBL unit. And the link at the bottom is a place I strongly encourage you to go to, because you'll find examples as well as articles that talk about many of these topics that are important to be thinking about. Let's see, project rubric where creativity and academics were included, and so couldn't. Yeah, and that's the thing about creativity, is that, so creativity can be an academic focus if it's connected directly to how they're supposed to be looking at the content. So another way to look at creativity is, when we think about Bloom's taxonomy, we think of synthesis as the highest level. Creativity is based upon the building blocks of critical thinking. And so synthesis is a close cousin to what creativity is all about. When we synthesize, we come up with new ideas. And so if it's done in that context where creativity is laid out specifically of how we're addressing that, uh, then it can be very helpful. But when we say, all right, you need to come up with a creative idea, what does that mean? I mean, that doesn't really tell the student anything, and it's very subjective and it's very open. I mean, it's good that you want open-ended directions for logistics, but from an assessment perspective, it should be, more along the lines of, we want you to look at the your use of, I want you to look at the issues that have come up about air quality as we've looked at that in chemistry or in physics or biology, whichever, pick your topic, how it affects the human body, how it affects the living and non-living things in the community, in terms of fog or sand. And we want you to generate a new solution that has not been proposed in the last 10 years. And maybe you have a list of proposals that people have come up with. Now you have a situation where, okay, how do I come up with something different? How do I build off of what other people came up with and make it better? That could be really creative. I've got some articles in my on my published side of my website where there's a couple that talk about creativity in this concrete way. That's a way to think about that. All right. So when we think about the first 5 to 7 days, you start in your PBL unit, what are things that you should be mindful of? And so the one is, first and foremost, within the first day is the entry event. How are you going to launch this to get students jazzed and excited about what they're going to do? Do they see a purpose and a reason beyond school? So it's having that, introducing them to an authentic audience, and what is the purpose for that work that you're going to meet a need for that authentic audience. So that's important. The authentic audience could be scenario, could be a pretend, based upon real people or real organizations, or it can be actual people. Either way can work for your first project. You give them the driving question, because this is what they have to answer by the end of the PBL unit experience. And both of those should happen the first day. Now, after that, at some point within that week, you want to do need to knows, which is kind of like a KWL. What do they know? What do they want to know? And what have they learned as they move along? And you introduce that. And again, there's some articles you can read that I've written that go into more detail about that particular piece. Again, if you're familiar with KWL, that is a very similar format that you can really explore. So then, you want to tell them within the first couple of days, what is the final product going to be, the final product performance? They need to know that on day one so that they can, so they know what they're preparing for. It's not the only assessment they're doing, and you don't have to give them all the assessments, but tell them what is that big product of performance they're going to do at the end. It's being transparent about what they're working on. And then within that first week, you give team assignments. A lot of times, some teachers wait 5 to 7 days before they form teams, because they want students to take time to get to know content and to give the teacher a chance to see where students' interests are. And then that way the teacher might group them based upon their common interests. You may have contracts or mediation plan. The mediation plan, we're going to come back later on in this session, because it talks about how to show students how to problem solve team issues. A contract is just how we agree to work together. And then the next 3 things are things you want to do every week. You want to review the need to knows, the KWL, say what new information that we find, have students explore that. Do team builders. Team builders is a way to build students' practice for how to work together, and then establish norms. Establishing norms is very important in a classroom at any time, but also especially in PBL, because norms are about what are the 3 to 5 behaviors that we all agree that we're going to follow to support each other in the learning and in the work we're going to do. And as students create those norms so that they have buying it. And again, one of the articles you have available talks about norms and gives you some steps. And if you want more help with that, just feel free to, send me an email or send me a WhatsApp text, and I can share that information if you look at the link below and you can't find it for yourself. Happy to help you with that. So what happens if those are the first week? What happens during the unit? And again, look at this. You're going to see a lot of stuff here, especially like on the blue side, that's very familiar. This is what you already do. You work with students in whole groups, small groups, individuals. You do that already. You give students choice and voice about some of the products or how they're going to do work. So we want to give them those choice and voice, give them more if we can. You're going to do formative assessments because some of them are academic checkpoints where you may be recording in the grade book, and some are just learning check-ins where you're just trying to monitor before those academic checkpoints what support students might need. So this is the normal practice of good quality instruction, teaching and learning that you do. Now we look on the side that's more peach color. These are the things that make PBL PBL. Because protocols that are student-led, which are structures by which students are working on, thinking through ideas, giving each other support, unpacking the curriculum. These are things that are really important. So one of your resources that you have is here's I've curated a list of a variety of different protocols you can use for a variety of purposes, and choose which ones you're going to use with your PBL unit. And by the way, use these in your traditional unit as well to empower students to take the lead in their learning so you can be more of a facilitator. And most of these strategies can be used in a virtual setting as well, either whole class or if you use breakout rooms. Now, I can't remember if you use Zoom or if you use Google Meets, but depending upon which one you do, you can do any of these. It just the structure might look different. And that's a question you can ask me later on. You say, hey, I'm using Zoom or using Google Meets, and this is one, I'm trying to use this protocol. John, can you give me some ideas of how I might do that using, based upon this information? And I'm more than happy to customize support and give you some of those answers. So that would be a great question if you do have that later on, to put that in the group chat, because you're not going to be the only one with that question. Or maybe you have ideas, you have ways you do it. Then let's celebrate the expertise that's internal in the staff, because I know it's there. I know you guys have it. So here's a chance to support each other. And you'll see the second bullet, authentic learning experiences. That is what is key to PBL, is that when students are learning core concepts, we're making connections to the world outside of school, the different professions. We're involving professionals in conversations with our students, either through recorded videos or through a live stream using, again, Zoom, Google Meets, or whatever tool you use to communicate, so that students are seeing and understanding that what they're learning really is relevant and related to the world beyond school. So this is what's happening throughout the project. So after you finish the template, you're going to look at least once or twice a week, where something in the peach is happening, once or twice a week, based upon your comfort zone. And that's for your first project. Maybe 3 years from now, you'll be able to do it every day. But that's not the expectation. I'm telling you, it's not the expectation in this project. You're doing the peach every day. That's not realistic. Do what you feel comfortable, once or twice a week. Because you should already be doing what's in the blue. That's already there. So let's build off of the good practices you have in place, and let's add what's in the peach. Students don't magically know how to organize their time. And I'm sure you're seeing this if you're teaching virtually, but it's also true in class, in person. So for example, this is an example where you give them a table where not everything's filled in, but except for the time amount, the task description, and the due dates. And what students do is they fill in the first column about what date and time are they going to do that task, so they can start to manage their work. And when they complete a task, they have to then check off on the far right-hand column that it's done. So this is something to really think about using or providing, creating some structure that you feel would be great for your students, because even your high school students do not magically know how to organize their time. They don't. Some do, some absolutely do, and let's stay out of their way. Let's let them do what they're doing because it's working for them. We'll show this an example. They might want to use it. They might want to tweak it. They might have their own way and they don't want to use it. And that's okay if they're doing well academically, if they're getting their work turned in on time. If they're not, then they use your structure and they have to practice your structure and cannot change from your structure until their work quality and their timeliness improves to your satisfaction. So this is just one idea. There's other structures. You have some that you feel might work better. Build those structures and provide to your students to coach them. And that's what PBL is all about, is building student agency to organize their time. The other thing we could do is we can provide them with something like this, a checklist. Like every week we can give them a checklist. Now this checklist is something that covers about 3 weeks of work. So 3 weeks of work, that's can be overwhelming for some kids. Now, for some of your students, they want the full list. They want to know everything that's involved, and they're going to be just fine planning. So you can provide a list, and in this case, you'll see that it's color-coded. So for students who would feel overwhelmed by looking at just this list of 8 items, you tell them, focus on the blue. Just the blue. That's all you got to do this week is focus on the blue. That's all that we need to accomplish this week. Next week, it's the white, and then the following week, it's going to be the peach. Now, if some of you get done with the blue sooner and you want to start in on the white, go right ahead. Not going to hold you back. But this is a way you can address the needs of all learners, those who need to see everything at once and those who might be overwhelmed by seeing everything at once. You can do color coding, or you could put them in 3 different files in a Google Doc. There's lots of ways that you can approach this. And then the last day. So on the last day, when the project is over and finished, get your students' feedback about this experience. What did they like about the project? What experiences they really enjoyed, they valued? What are some things that they would give feedback that they didn't like or found was a struggle? Like they don't have a solution, they just found it, they didn't like it, or they struggled. And then the last thing is, what are suggestions they have? Take those in. You might be able to use that year with other units, or you save them for your revisions of the project when you move on, when you come back to it the next year. All right, so I've shared a lot with you, a lot of different topics. That list of PBL documents. We talked about benchmarks and check-ins. Benchmarks are those great recorded assessments. Check-ins are formative. We talked about the first 5 days, what you should be doing. We talked about the learning process, the peach. Remember the peach concepts. We talked about these other areas as well. What is one area that you are feeling like you want to spend more time on, or that really resonated, felt like, oh, this is really, I see this as important. So what was important, or that you want to spend more time on? When you're ready, please post in the chat box. So let's take about 10 seconds to silently reflect. First 5 to 7 days. I mean, that's, we go back right there. Yeah, there's a lot there. And really, it's about these first 4 things really should happen within the first 2 days. That's where you start. Benchmarks and check-ins. It gives me structure, in turn gives structure. Yes, absolutely. It helps us, the more that we can make visible the work we do with students, the better that students can then follow our lead and grow, because they have those structures. And in fact, later on, we're going to talk about a very important structure that I can say without exception, every successful PBL school that I have seen, they use these certain key areas and they have success. Because they make the learning, they make the lessons transparent to students, so that students really understand the purpose and value of what they're doing and the why they're doing that, which in turn helps our teachers, all of you, to communicate with each other about, feedback that really helps you grow your practice to make it even better. Because at the end of the day, we all want the same thing. We want our students to be successful. And if our students are successful, we have been successful. So gallery walk is just one example of a protocol that we can have students do. And this, by the way, can be done virtually as well. Where you post things up and you have them share their, as one example, I likes, I wonders, and what ifs, because it's a way for students to learn to give good feedback. Because sometimes students give feedback and they go, oh, that's not good. Well, what does that mean? Instead say, I like, or I notice, which is a phrase that helps us identify something constructive and positive that's already been done correctly or done well. I wonder statements are ways that we share areas that we think may be potential needs for improvement or growth. And what ifs are suggestions. So example might be, I like how in your paper you had a very clear introduction with the thesis statement. I wonder if the paragraphs that follow needs more detail to align better with the thesis statement. What if you use examples and illustrations as details, those type of details, to better align the work? So that gives you how that language can be very invitational, and it teaches students professional ways to give feedback, as opposed to saying, that's wrong. There are tools like learning preference cards. And by the way, all these are referenced on the link below where you can actually read more in depth about them. But these cards are a way to collect information from your students about themselves, how they see themselves, and then use that data to help form your groups, to ensure that groups have students feel like they all contribute strengths, as well as understanding their perceptions of their own skills. It's important to establish roles. Now, this is always a question I get. It's like, where do you come up with the roles, the names? And there's lots of places. Like if you look up literature circles as a search, you're going to find that they have roles, titles. I make up my own titles, and I put some type of leadership tag in there, whether it's manager or editor. Because the student who's in that role, their job is not to do all the work. Their job is to facilitate the teams doing that work. So each of them may have their own respective checklists that might be from a master checklist you've given them. You might even broke it down like, this is for the print editor, this is for the research editor, this is for the media editor, and the project manager's job is to make sure everyone is progressing through the checklist as they do the work. So that's what's nice about team roles. And you don't have to assign the students. You just assign you make the teams and then give the roles to the students. It's even best if you have like a job description for each role, and then let the students in the team decide who's going to be what. Let them pick. If they keep picking the same role, either let them, because as you do more projects, that's just their engagement level. Or sometimes you can say, all right, we've done 2 projects or 2 where we had teams. And so for this next one, whatever role you've done, if you only done 1 role, you have to pick a second role, a different role. Or whatever role you were in last project, you have to pick a different role from that one. And that's a way you can start to mix things up and students get, some different experiences. The mediation clause. This is so powerful. I've witnessed in a number of schools that use this type of structure, how effective it can be, because it empowers students to problem solve issues in their team. How do you know you need this? Well, think about when you put students in teams. And have you ever had student teams that didn't work? They didn't get along and became toxic or problematic. I'm sure you can picture them. I mean, it's happened. And so my question that I always ask teachers is, when students are in a team that's not working and they're dysfunctional, they're argumentative, they don't get along, who usually has to solve that problem? I got to tell you, 99.9% of the time, the answer I get from teachers is the teacher has to solve the problem, or at least start the solution. And if that's the case, that means the students haven't learned how to solve problems, how to identify team issues before they get out of hand and address them. And that's what the mediation clause does. And again, there's an article that goes in detail about this, but essentially, teachers do not get actively involved until step 3. By then, the students have done some one-on-one mediations as well as team mediation with the student on their team who's a cause of an issue or who's not doing work. So it's a very powerful way to empower students to take control of their teams and help make it the best that they possibly can. All right, so which idea here intrigues you the most? Which one you think, this is an area I really want to spend time on and make sure that I have something in place. And then please share which one in the chat. Okay, wow, yes, mediation. I love the fact that we have different, people have interest in different areas. And I always say, look at who's saying similar things. And, maybe that's someone that you come together, like Aya and Shaza are both talking about mediation clause. I mean, so, collaborate. Look at the article, discuss, the article on that, because I have an article about that in this link you see at the bottom. Read about it and think about how you'd want to implement it and maybe propose or share. Say, hey, this is how we're going to do it. If you guys like to do it, follow us, go for it. That can be really powerful. All right, cool. So this is really important. This is the piece that I see culturally, systemically throughout PBL schools. And this is a tool that can be used and actually should be used even when not doing a project. So students are just used to it. So the project wall is where you would post up this key information. Driving question, focus standards, need to knows, those things, and a calendar should be up starting with within the first 2 days. Checklists, rubrics, and vocabulary lists or word walls, those go up as needed. Meaning that if you're not going to give them a checklist until the second week, don't post it in week 1 because they don't need it. They're not going to pay attention to it. But the first 4 should be posted. And the project calendar, if it's a 4-week project, don't give them all 4 weeks. Just give them the week you're in. That's all they need to see. And then just add to it as the weeks go by. So here's some examples of project walls. And so what's important is, like, for example, the wall on the left, the blue, is better than the wall on the right. And the key part is the driving question, because the driving question should be big enough that students can see from anywhere in the classroom. So when you're in the classroom, it should be that way. Where on the right-hand side, it's really small. Students aren't going to be able to see it. Now, if you're teaching virtually, it's a little bit easier because you can just have a project wall. They can look on their screen, they can read it. So there's support there. You notice the calendar. The calendar doesn't have to be big enough for them all to read it in person, but they should be able to walk up and look and know what's going on. Again, if you're teaching virtually, it's not an issue because they can just click and view it. And it's good for parents to see as well, so they can best support their students along the way. This is just another example. And again, by the way, when this is done, I've uploaded a PDF version of this. You can look at it much more closely and see. So you notice that the project wall tends to be in one place where all students can see. Now, if you're rotating your classrooms, so as a teacher, if you're moving between classrooms, you might say, well, what do I do there? Because there's only so much wall space. You can either identify a wall that you get, between the teachers, or you can have this, like, you see how this is all, like, the vocabulary is on one chart and deliverables on a separate chart. You can actually put it all onto one chart and just keep the charts in the room by grade level and then put those up or have them up, together. You collaborate with your peers, your teachers, decide where do you put them. Just don't put them on the back wall because students will not see them. Put them on the front or the side walls so that you can refer to them as needed, because you're going to refer to these on a daily basis, especially the driving question. Because you always talk about, you say, for example, in this case, how can we, the kids of Catherine Smith, create a constitution that establishes the rules and norms of an upper grade student between, I can't read that, upper grade students, behavior and something else. And today we're going to talk about author choice in reading. And so you make that connection to the learning outcome of that day with the driving question. And that helps students see how the unit itself is tied, the big project idea is tied to the learning of that day. Here's another example to look at. This is early elementary example. How can we as nutritionists create and share healthy recipes? That was their driving question that they're focused on. That their standards, that their calendar. Here's an example because they're trying to look at wall space. So you see there's that pipe that's in the middle of it. Again, they're putting information up and you see they only have for that week because it's the first week of the project. So it's on an as need to know basis that you put information up. And you also do that virtually too. Here's a know and need to know. You see the bottom left-hand side. This is how, they list questions from the students. So these are student questions, not teacher questions. And then as they're answered, then they're checked off. Here's an example of a room where they had events and they had to figure out how to be creative with their space to do their wall. So you can be very creative in your rooms and come up with ways. Does everything need to be in one space? No. It'd be helpful if it was, but if you have to be creative and have it in different places in the room, that's fine as long as it's not in the back of the room where students don't see it. And by the way, when you go into the website, the link at the bottom, you will see that there's an article that gives you more examples of project walls you can look at and think about. So why are project walls beneficial as communication with learners? Why do you think it's beneficial? Take a moment to think about that question and then post your answer in the chat. Take 10 seconds to reflect. Yeah, it's definitely visual. It's right there in their attention that you're going to be referring to the project wall on a daily basis. Even if it's in a digital classroom, you do the exact same thing. I like your word choice of they have direction. And that's what's so important because I can't speak for your classes, but I see classrooms where the teacher knows what they're going to teach and what they're going to do that day, or even what they're going to do that week. And they don't tell the students until, they just roll it out. And the result is that there's a lot of students who learn to be passive participants. They just wait to be told what to do. This way, by making it transparent, it flips the responsibility on students because they are part of the process. Yeah, it helps students prepare their work daily. Absolutely. They can see it every day and build on what they're doing. I love your phrase, build on what they are doing, because that's exactly what's happening. Yeah, very good points. And it is gentle reminder. It gets to a point where how when sometimes you share something with students about assignments or tasks, and then right after you share it, they ask you, what is it we got to do? Well, now you can say, go look at the project wall. And then they know, don't ask that question until you looked in the project wall. If you don't see it there, then ask. But if the teacher, it's in the project wall, that rubric is up there, that task is up there, then you just say, go look at the project wall. And if it's a digital project wall, or if you have a combination, you say, go check your project wall. They can look digitally and see it. So a way of looking at that digitally is that because your students have multiple classes they're taking, is that if you're doing one Google Classroom per subject, see students do that. That's one way you can do it. Or per folder, each folder has a different subject, and then kids go into that respective folder. Provides a higher level of organization, which makes it easier for students to work on their project and avoid confusion. Yes. And like Dina says, it will establish routine in class. And by the way, can you see how a project wall could just be called a student learning wall? And we just do that even when we're not doing a project, but when we're doing our traditional units. Let's make learning transparent so it empowers students. Okay, so that completes this webinar about management. However, if you have any questions, please feel free to ask them. What questions might you have at this point? Okay, in case there are no questions right now, which could be understanding, you're digesting everything we explored. At this point, your task is to complete the template as well as design a rubric that's going to go with that project. And as those are completed, which I will be looking at in the Google Classrooms, I'm going to be looking at what is posted in the 5th section, because that's where you post your final your PBL unit. And that's where I will be adding comments and feedback. The way Google Classrooms is set up, I can only send private messages, but I will be posting there. And then if you have any questions, just let me know anytime. Use the WhatsApp as well as email. If we need to do a live session with a small group, we can schedule that between now and October where it works. But let's try doing the chat first and see if we can find those solutions. We're going to be holding hybrid classes in the first weeks. So yeah, so I would suggest with hybrid classes that, like the project wall, the student learning wall, have a virtual version as well as a physical version so that they have a way to look at it virtually at home. But then you can print it out or post it in the room. And it's very important to have something in the room that they can work from. All right. Well, thank you for participating and thank you for your flexibility. I'm really disappointed we couldn't use the YouTube stream for this one, but it seemed to work out just fine. So that's all that matters. And like I said, this is a project in a project. And I wish you guys all the best today. Have a good night's rest. And I look forward to seeing what you put together as well as your questions that come after today.